this amazing stranger from the planet Krypton, the Man of Steel, Superman.
He's the Man of Steel who's become the world's biggest superhero. But behind Superman's red cape and X-ray vision lies the sinister story of a Hollywood curse that many believe has blighted those associated with him. As the fifth Superman film hits our cinema screens, we reveal a dark tale of tragic accidents, suicide, murder, debilitating illness, and mental breakdown.
Most people, I think, have the sense not to flip out on the evening news. It's not a method I recommend.
If I were Warner Brothers, I would definitely go to a voodoo princess and ask that the curse be lifted.
I don't believe in things like curses, she says. Oh, dear.
The origins of Superman and the Curse began in 1930s America, a country in the grip of a deep economic depression. In this climate of poverty and deprivation, Americans badly needed a hero, and it was two self-proclaimed comic book geeks who came to the rescue. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were the shy, bespectacled geniuses who created the Man of Steel and his alter ego in 1939. Clark Kent may have represented who they were, but in Superman, they created a superhero who was everything they wanted to be.
I was always pushed around by bullies and so forth, so that was one of my dreams.
I thought, gee, wouldn't it be great if I was a mighty person and these girls didn't know that this Claude here is really somebody special, and I had to help lead to this whole triangle setup of Clark Kent, Lois Lane, and Superman.
Siegel and Shuster named Superman's characters after their own heroes. As tribute to their favourite movie idols, Clark came from Clark Gable and Kent from Kent Taylor. Lane was a homage to the pin-up singing stars the Lane sisters, and Lois was named after Lois Rothschild, the unrequited love from Jerry Siegel's school days.
Here's the pencil sketch of the original Superman, and that was the first cover of the Superman book. That was 1939.
The first issue of the comic book reveals Superman's origins on the planet Krypton and shows him being rocketed to Earth as a baby.
He has the build of a fairly normal man, a man in decent shape, and he's doing things that aren't terribly fantastic. Superman hears about a man beating his wife and zooms in and frightens the guy, and the guy faints. A little joke on the fact that the tough guy isn't really so tough after all. There were multiple Superman stories a month, and they ran into the problem of what do we do with this guy now? What is Superman going to do this week that he didn't do last week? So they began to add new powers, for one thing. Suddenly he flew, and then he flew faster, and then he began to get X-ray vision, and as time went on, it was sort of nothing Superman couldn't do. And so you begin to see a more physically muscular Superman.
Superman struck a chord with the American public and became a hero for both children and adults, symbolizing the dream of truth, justice, and the American way. His daring adventures gripped the nation, and it was only a matter of time before the Man of Steel made the leap from comic book to small screen.
Look, up in the sky, it's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's Superman.
The first man to don the blue tights was former boxer George Reeves in 1952. Every Monday night at 7 p.m, the whole country stopped to watch the adventures of Superman, turning Reeves into a huge Hollywood star.
Well, I enjoyed the George Reeves shows. I enjoyed him a lot. Him and Jack Larson as Jimmy Olsen. I thought that was quite inventive and funny and good. And I liked the Clark Kent character he played, who was a strong Clark Kent.
Lois, it's good to see you again.
All in the day's work, Clark. While you were out covering Stamp Day, Superman and I were cleaning up a case.
They were in a little trouble with their special effects, but it was the 50s. So it's a little tough. Jumping out the window off a little springboard, flying, laying on a box. On that sound.
I always consider the curse, if there is one, to be the fact that that role really ruined or derailed George Reeves' acting career.
Bye now.
But when Reeves hung up his red cape after 104 episodes, he found himself typecast. The series was finished, and so was he. Nobody wanted to employ the Man of Steel. Reeves sunk into a deep depression and hit the bottle.
Old man rhythm is in my shoes. It's no use.
It was the beginning of a downward spiral. In an attempt to hold on to his dwindling fame, Reeves threw riotous cocktail parties. And it was at one such evening on the 16th of June 1959 that the first Superman tragedy struck.
They were having drinks, and George came downstairs, complained about the noise, and went back upstairs after a brief argument. Those downstairs heard a gunshot, and according to the police report, Lenora Lemon, George's girlfriend at the time, said, "Oh, that's just George going upstairs shooting himself." There was a single gunshot wound to the head. The bullet entered his right temple, exited, and the bullet was lodged in the ceiling. He was lying nude in a pool of blood on his bed. The gun was at his feet.
Because of the alcohol and the drugs that were in his system, the police immediately identified or signed off on it as a suicide. But for years, there's been a lot of speculation around his death.
America was shocked to discover that the man who once flew faster than a speeding bullet had ended his own life with a shot in the head.
In 1959 America, that was not a pleasant subject at all. People did not have a way of processing that. There was a kind of taint of scandal to his death.
I don't want to be like old George Reeves, stuck in a Superman role.
Reeves' dramatic demise did nothing to dent the popularity of the Superman comic books. But while the publishers raked in a multi-million-dollar fortune, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who'd created Superman, were paid a paltry sum for the rights to their character. By the 1970s, they were virtually penniless.
We signed the release form trustfully, and now I'm working in the mailroom, and the publisher has earned hundreds of millions of dollars.
I think Jerry and Joe felt like they ought to be taken care of somewhat, respected a bit for having brought this character in that virtually created the comic book industry.
You might think they're millionaires, but Jerry, how much did you get for the rights to Superman?
Exactly $130.
Split between the two of you.
$65 apiece.
On Thanksgiving Day weekend, my hope for you both is that somehow proper recompense comes to you.
Thank you very much, Howard.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, John.
And there's more in a moment when the Hoops
Recompense
learn
didn't
just how
come for Siegel and
important
Shuster. In
friendships are.
1975, to add insult to injury, Warner Brothers announced they were making a blockbuster Superman movie. At $80 million, it was the most expensive film of the decade.
My idea was just, okay, let's do a big movie.
You're watching Channel 4 with a warm Sunday morning welcome
that were,
from the Hoops.
Let's face it, very, very simple. And that was really the idea. Let's do a big film. Let's do a film, a serious film.
The news was more than Siegel and Shuster could bear.
For the past 30 years, we have received nothing at all from Superman.
It's been 30 years of deprivation.
When Siegel realized, yet again, that they wouldn't benefit financially from their comic book creation, the mild-mannered Clark Kent took matters into his own hands and typed a dramatic, damning public declaration that would haunt the Superman movies. The publishers of Superman comic books killed my days, murdered my nights, choked my happiness, and strangled my career. I consider the executives to be economic murderers and money-mad monsters, and I, Jerry Siegel, the co-originator of Superman, curse the Superman movie. The dark days of Superman were about to begin. In 1975, Warner Brothers revealed that they were making a multi-million-dollar movie of Superman. But the creators of The Man of Steel, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, were outraged that they would earn just $65 apiece from their superhero invention. Angry and bitter, they placed a dark curse on the movie. But this Hollywood hex didn't deter the unknown actor picked to play Superman. Christopher Reeve's chiseled features embodied the fantasy hero for a new generation.
They didn't really necessarily require a name. Superman is a big enough name. I don't know of another actor who could have pulled it off. with the sense of humor, the physicality, and the fact that he nailed it.
Excuse me. That's a bad outfit.
You know, nobody believes in anything before it's done. And at that point, the first immediate replies were, "We'll never make him fly."
The movie was a box office smash, partly due to groundbreaking special effects that helped to create the illusion, for the first time in cinematic history, that a man could really fly.
You know, is it a bird, is it a plane? No, it's Superman. In that first film particularly, people seeing Superman fly, you know, mouth wide open with absolute amazement.
He flew in about... It would take pioneering techniques, using ropes and harnesses, to create the special effects that would inspire wonder in cinema audiences.
There were a lot of trial and error misses. And in particular, the scene where we flew off the balcony in the first flying scene, we were attached to our harnesses. I had a fellow named Derek who did like to tipple on the wheel that controlled my harness. And we would go off semi together in the air, and then I would go flying out here and whack back into Chris, or Chris would go up and I'd drop down, or they'd drop us in the bushes, or we'd hit the wall. I think that first takeoff scene we did something like 60-something times. And Christopher just stayed in character all the time. He really believed in the myth of Superman. Chris was much more Clark Kent in real life than he was Superman.
The filmmakers pulled off an amazing coup by casting the world's biggest box office name, Marlon Brando, to play Superman's dad, Jor-El.
You just look at Marlon on screen and he's so magnetic, such a presence and that such a great voice.
My friends, you know me to be neither rash nor impulsive. I'm not given to wild, unsupported statements. And I tell you that we must evacuate this planet immediately.
He was still the biggest named star in the world. He was still in pretty good nick. This was before he got very fat and just took the money and waddled when he turned up on a film set. And they had to pay him a huge amount of money for this coffin, a spit of a part, really.
They offered him almost $4 million, plus about 16% of the gross income from the movie, for what amounted to 11 and a half days of work, 8 minutes of film. It was one of the best deals ever made in Hollywood.
That was the first time I'd realized that actually Marlon did a lot of reading of his lines from around the set, or from a card, because he didn't believe in learning them.
It's the only answer, Lara. If he remains here with us, he will die as surely as we will.
But why Earth, Jor-El? They're primitives, thousands of years behind us.
He will need that advantage to survive.
Superman was the film that kind of broke Brando as an actor. That after that, he was never quite the same. He'd got away with something on Superman that no actor should perhaps ever be allowed to get away with, which is earning a multi-million-dollar paycheck and not actually doing the work.
Immediately after the first Superman movie, Brando just went out of control, really. A lot of people would have, I suppose if you got 14 million, Hollywood people might have put it up their nose, not Marlon Brando, he put it in his stomach.
Overpaid and overblown, Brando's film appearances would be few and far between after Superman. He became fiercely protective of his private life and turned into a virtual recluse. His next most talked about performance, however, was not on the silver screen, but in a courtroom.
And you ask these guys to shut up.
The Mulholland Drive mansion that Brando shared with his wayward daughter Cheyenne and her boyfriend Dag Drolet had been the scene of a terrible tragedy.
You have this kind of weird situation where they're all living together under one roof. Into this scenario, this kind of perfect sort of stage drama, you've got Brando's son Christian. By all accounts, he's a hard drinker. He dabbles in drugs, and he's also a bit of a kind of gun fanatic too.
Christian flew into a rage following accusations that Dag had physically abused his sister. A fight broke out with disastrous consequences. Leaving Cheyenne without a boyfriend, Christian locked up in jail, and Brando a broken man. As news was leaked that Christian had killed his sister's lover, the world's media gathered outside Brando's home.
Must be the killing time, unwillingly mine. Fate up against a will through the thick.
It was probably the kind of biggest Hollywood court case in decades. And at the centerpiece of it, obviously, is Brando, Marlon Brando, who comes in and treats the jury to this rambling, 1 hour long testimony.
You do solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God?
No, I will not swear on God because I don't believe in the conventional sense. And this nonsense.
Brando was as difficult and unorthodox in court as he was rumoured to be on set.
And you ask these guys to shut up.
And would you please state your name for the record?
Marlon Brando Jr.
I was an observer there for several weeks and spoke to Brando many times, and I could not tell whether the man was either the most moved father imaginable or simply the greatest actor playing another role.
So dang laying there. And I tried to get hold of myself.
Brando, in this kind of strange fit of self-loathing, was almost trying to shoulder the blame himself for what had happened. He seemed to be implying that if he had been a better father, none of this would have happened. And so therefore, if you're going to blame anyone, blame me, he's saying.
And I felt his pulse on his neck. He still had a pulse. And I breathed into his mouth, and I called 911.
Christian Brando is eventually sentenced to 10 years for voluntary manslaughter. Afterwards, Brando goes out and faces the press, and Brando, by this point, hates the press and refuses to give any interviews.
As Brando left court, it seemed his bad luck was over, but there was more to come.
The daughter of the actor Marlon Brando has committed suicide at her home in Tahiti. Relatives said 25-year-old Cheyenne Brando had been depressed since her half-brother killed her boyfriend 5 years ago. She was found hanging in her bedroom at home on Sunday.
The perfect world that he'd been trying to kind of create for his family had just finally kind of imploded. And I think kind of a lot of life went out of him as well at that point.
Brando was so grief-stricken, he couldn't bring himself to attend his daughter Cheyenne's funeral. In 1980, Superman 2 was released to worldwide acclaim, making superstars out of Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder, the smoky-voiced actress who played Lois Lane. As fiction's first lady of the press and sidecar to Superman's motorcycle, the assertive, adventurous reporter barely noticed the shy Clark Kent, yet swooned for Superman.
But they call me the Superman lover, yeah. Say they call me the Superman lover, yeah. But something wrong.
What's so ironic about people seeing me as the quintessential Lois Lane is that when I got the part, I knew absolutely nothing about Superman. The key to getting it was somewhat manipulative and scheming. The key to getting it was to look as if I really, really loved Superman. And so I took that as my objective, as an actor would say, my motivating thing, that I was so in love with this man I couldn't see straight, and just played that.
I suggest that we do that.
Well, you could take a ride with me right now if you'd like to.
A ride? You mean I could fly?
Well, actually, I'd be handling the flying if that's okay with you.
When I saw the test, I was so impressed with how Christopher was able to make it totally believable. And then when Margot came on with him, as the test demonstrates, you immediately knew this was the combination.
Ready?
Clark said that you were rigged with wires, like Peter Pan.
Well, Peter Pan flew with children, Lois, in a fairy tale.
I remember the screen test very well because I remember coming in and thinking, oh my God, this is not who they've cast. This isn't Superman. It was this really skinny guy whose pant legs were too far up against his sock, you know, and who was kind of dorky. And so, and our chemistry actually from the get-go, from the screen test, was pretty much the same as it stayed, which was a older sister, younger brother kind of thing.
They were the screen couple of the decade. The chemistry between them was never more apparent than in the famous scene where Superman saves Lois from certain death.
Clark sees it, I guess, and then turns into Superman and flies out, and I'm in there screaming as the door opens, and then I fall out. And he flies up and catches me in his arms. And I say the line that people actually stop me on the street and say at me, which is,
I've got you.
You've got me! Who's got you? I can't believe it. I just cannot believe it. He got her.
That's the moment when Lois Lane falls in love with Superman. Not with Clark Kent, but she falls in love with Superman.
Look, Chief, the panic's on. The thing's gone haywire.
But Lois Lane's real-life fall was to be more spectacular and more bizarre than anything dreamed up by the filmmakers.
She suffered neck injuries, injured an arm and a leg, had nerve damage, partially paralyzed, I believe, one of her legs, and it was really the beginning of a very difficult time for her.
and I screwed up my spine and pinched something off in the left side, which alternately semi-paralyzed my left side. I'm really lucky I'm alive from that one. Really lucky.
Margot's huge medical bills left her bankrupt, and she was unable to find work in Hollywood because of her injuries. She slumped into a severe depression, which eventually spiraled into a major psychotic episode.
Margot Kidder is in the psychiatric ward this morning. The co-star of several Superman movies was found dazed and confused Wednesday in the backyard of a Glendale, California home.
I looked twice, but it was definitely Margot Kidder. She looked like she hadn't eaten for a couple of days.
This is where she wound up, in the backyard of a stranger's house, hiding in a woodpile, her face covered with scratches.
At the time of her discovery, she was wearing disheveled clothes, cast-off clothing, and had apparently cut her own hair off with a razor blade in an attempt to alter her appearance.
Well, it was tough. At first, it was mortifying to have it all over the news. I mean, when you're lying in a hospital looking at the television and there are reports of your own flip out on the news, it was, I mean, it's so mortifying you can't believe it.
Her mental breakdown had begun at 3 o'clock in the morning in Hollywood's LAX airport.
She introduced herself, and the next thing she said is, "Someone's trying to kill me. He's hired many people here at the airport, and they're looking for me, and I need you to protect me."
Did you think she really was in danger?
I did, until she started pointing to people who were on the plane with us, saying, "That person has been following me all day," and then saying, "I see you, I can see what you're doing over there looking at me." And then it became pretty sad and scary, and we knew she was very confused.
In a deranged state of mind, Margot scribbled paranoid notes and gave them to strangers in the airport, including one that said, "I am dead." The next time Margot was spotted, she was living with the homeless in downtown LA. Her front teeth had been knocked out during an attempted rape.
There was an incident that happened when I was crazy as a bedbug wandering around downtown LA, and I was wandering, at one point I was somewhere downtown, and there were helicopters overhead and a street cleaner, and I thought they were there just for me because they had to kill me. And I was being shot, and I was racing in a state of terror from street corner to street corner, and two old black men came up with their shopping cart. They were homeless. And one of them said, "Lady, I think you're very confused. Why don't you come with us? We'll take care of you." And I did. I went with them, and I was walking down the street with them, and for some reason my snooty factor kicked in. And I felt the need to say to one of these guys, whose name turned out to be Charlie, I said, "You know, I'm not from this part of town. I don't know how to act in this part of town." And he went, "Lady, none of us are from this part of town."
And that there ain't no such thing as a Superman. There ain't no such thing as a Superman.
When I was downtown with the homeless, I said, "Well, now, for gosh sakes, guys, don't be homeless downtown. This is a horrible downtown L.A. What a cesspool. If you're going to be homeless, let's do it in the woods." I was nutty as a fruitcake. "Let's go up to my friend Rosie's cabin and we can kill squirrels," or something like that. But I didn't get any takers. So I was on my way on my own.
Margot was actually making her way to a close friend of hers, Rosie Schuster. And now Rosie, by some bizarre coincidence, and Superman is full of these strange, bizarre coincidences, is a relative of the original Superman creator, Joe Shuster.
Lucky Lois. Always gets her story.
And luckily, she lived to write it.
By the time Superman 3 was released, Margot's role had been reduced to a bit part.
I was axed from 3. I had 12 lines, and one of them was "Oh, Clark." So you can tell what a beefy part that was. I went off on vacation and came back at the end with a tan.
But as Superman 3 creaked into action, the curse would turn its attention to Hollywood's funniest Hellraiser, Richard Pryor.
I remember one time this guy from Warner Brothers was coming over, he's going to do a film with me, and he came over and he opened the cage, and I said, "Don't open the cage!" I'm like,
Superman 3, as big as it was, it almost symbolized a period where things started to go the opposite direction for Richard.
Superman! The third Superman blockbuster, released in 1983, continued to make Warner Brothers rich, while Superman's co-creators received a mere $130 for the rights to their character. Even the movie's star, Richard Pryor, received a multi-million-dollar paycheck. In the 1970s, Richard Pryor was the funniest man alive, a tragic comic genius who grew up in a whorehouse where his mother was a prostitute and his father was a pimp. The greatest stand-up comedian of all time was also America's favourite Hellraiser, but his reputation did nothing to take away his crown as the godfather of comedy.
You better be for real, I got sex appeal. This is what I feel, and this here's my vow, and now you know the brother with no how. You know what I'm saying?
Thinking about death, though, I'd like to die like my father died. Right? My father died fucking. He did. My father was 57 when he died, right? The woman was 18. My father came and went at the same time.
Superman is a very white movie. All those white people flying around, I mean, they needed some blackness, let's face it. They needed, like, they probably went, "Oh my God, we're all so white here. Maybe we should get a black man in here." And they got the funniest black man around.
The main reason is they just wanted to make Superman 3 funny, you know that, and it's so clear from the opening sequence, which is very much a slapstick sequence. You know, the opening credits, it's like a Buster Keaton kind of, sequence.
No way.
He did some quite good shtick in it, you know. There's one scene where he's cavorting about with a pink towel, doing an impersonation of Superman, which is funny. Yeah, of course it's funny, because Richard Pryor's a very funny man.
This cake was flapping in the wind. He was flying. He was great. He was just flying around. Shh. The cake was blowing in the wind like this. Shh. Looked like a flag. Shh. And he landed right in the middle of this big plantation.
Richard Pryor as a way of demonstrating, you know, the powers that Superman has to Robert Vaughn and his kind of cohorts. Just says, you know, I've seen Superman fly, I've seen all the powers he has.
And then he put these laser beams out of his eyes onto everything. Bzzz, 3 hot laser beams. Dried up everything, just like that.
During filming, Pryor's marriage to former model and actress Jennifer Lee hit the rocks as he turned his attention to his co-star.
Well, can I say fucking? Because he started fucking Margie. Margie, I love you, girl. We love Margie now. But at the time, I didn't love her at all. I wanted to kill her.
I was so in love with him in those days, and I had 2 or 3 rounds of our romance, and I think one was when we were shooting Superman 3. I was one of many, trust me. There was an exclusive tab on this. And I remember we suddenly looked up and he went, Richie Pryor's in bed with Lois Lane! And he was like an 8-year-old kid. He was so excited and pleased with himself.
Pryor's marriage to Jennifer collapsed, and Superman 3 opened to bad reviews. Superman 3 was a box office flop and marked a downturn, not only for the American superhero, but also for its star.
Well, 3 wasn't very good, for starters. And one of the things they did to Richard was something that directors and producers have done to Richard forever. Richard's really an accomplished actor. They just thought, oh, we've got Richard Pryor, we're paying him, it's his job to be funny. And I think the producers and director on Superman 3 were very guilty of that they didn't give him a lot of support. I know he had a really hard time making it.
Superman 3, as big as it was, it almost symbolized a period where things started to go the opposite direction for Richard. And again, his health was suffering.
He did lose a lot of weight. There was a lot of rumors and speculation in the press about what could possibly have been wrong with him after the filming.
In 1986, Pryor was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a debilitating and degenerative disease that attacks the central nervous system.
You suffer spasms, you suffer muscle control, speech is affected, obviously mobility.
Last night I was so depressed and I went and got the Bible and I turned to...
His health continued to decline and eventually he required round-the-clock medical care. Although not everyone involved in Pryor's life had his best interest at heart.
Oy, oy, oy. The help was selling furniture out of the garage. Yeah, you can't make that up. I mean, it was like Hollywood. Ex-girlfriends, ex-wives, huge amounts of money flying out the door. Basically he said, my health is down, my business is failing. You've got to come back and make some sense out of this. It was really a challenge. I had my life threatened. I had my life threatened by Mexican maids. I had to get a restraining order on one of the ex-wives. I had to fire everybody, the lawyers, the accountants, the caregivers, the housekeepers. I mean, you name them, they got fired. There was a lot of hanky-panky going on.
I'm sorry, Jenny, that I ever hurt you. I wish I'd have known better. I wouldn't have.
We were young and stupid.
We were young. You were stupid.
Where would Richard be if he were completely healthy and able to get into his car and drive somewhere? He'd be in a whorehouse, sucking on a pipe, or he'd be in a dope house sucking on a whore. That's the truth.
Jennifer safeguarded Pryor's health and business affairs as his disease progressed.
See him very much alive and very much part of my life. He's my life. He's my life. That's how I would describe our relationship.
As Pryor's health deteriorated, so did Superman's screen reputation. Superman 4 opened in 1987, with Christopher Reeve once more at the helm. Reeve only agreed to step into the blue tights if he could be involved as a writer. But the movie was panned by critics and audiences alike. The special effects didn't compare with the original hit film 10 years earlier. In fact, the fight sequences in space between Superman and the new villain were so farcical that they've been hailed as some of the worst ever seen on screen.
Superman 4 was a noble attempt at saying something about the nuclear proliferation on the planet through Superman.
I can't stand idly by and watch us stumble into the madness of possible nuclear destruction. And so I've come to a decision. I'm going to do what our governments have been unwilling or unable to do. Effective immediately, I'm going to rid our planet of all nuclear weapons.
Unfortunately, the script was just dreadful. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. That script was terrible. And there's that old saying in Hollywood, you can make a bad movie out of a good script, but you cannot make a good movie out of a bad script. So I don't think you had a chance from the get-go.
I always know when Superman's in trouble.
Superman, something's happened to him?
Everybody's saying that he's dead, but it can't be true. I just know it. I feel it in my heart. I think he just needs help.
Superman had bombed, and Reeves' involvement as a writer had spectacularly failed. The once phenomenally successful movie series had become a cinematic turkey. Christopher Reeve, no longer the Man of Steel, was now merely the Man of Flesh.
Christopher Reeve tried after Superman 4 to move his career forward. So many people in Hollywood saw him just as Superman, and he obviously developed other interests. One of them was a great love of show jumping. He was a very good horse rider.
He was a daredevil. He was always flying his own planes. In fact, flying across the country, there was one incident where he nearly hit a Boeing 707 flying into Los Angeles one day. I mean, he was always just on the edge of, like, having an accident.
And just like Reeves' co-stars, tragedy would also strike him down.
When Christopher Reeve went over that horse, right over the head, went over the jump and landed on his neck and was taken to the hospital, paralyzed. He had what's known as a C2 break, and that refers to the number of vertebrae. I think it's the second or third vertebrae down.
Reeve currently has no movement or spontaneous respiration. He may require surgery to stabilize the upper spine in the near future. At this time, it is premature to speculate about his long-term prognosis.
He stopped, and I wasn't, really paying attention, and I just went over his head, straight down, sort of like a jackknife right into the ground, and managed to actually disconnect my head from my spinal column. And the surgeons managed to put my head back on.
Of course, when I heard about the accident, it was horrible, quite horrible.
My initial thought was, oh my gosh, of all the people to have it happen to, Chris was the wrong one. Not because it was going to obviously impede his athletics, which he was very good at, but because he had never been an introspective guy. He had not been someone who'd surfed the internal terrain, as it were. And I thought, boy, I don't know if he's going to be able to handle this at all. Well,
his first reaction when he learned where the break was and what happened was despair. And that turned to thoughts of suicide. In fact, he talked with his wife, Dana, about whether or not he should commit suicide.
But this was Superman, and against all the odds, he was determined to walk again.
One of my core beliefs is that I will not be spending the rest of my life in a wheelchair. To stand up and take a few steps would be fantastic. Would be miraculous.
To see the man who portrayed this character in a wheelchair, unable to move, unable to breathe without a ventilator, things like that, it was just, oof. It was extremely ironic that this actor would be in that situation, and extremely tragic.
He never made it. After a 10-year struggle to overcome his paralysis, Christopher Reeve, the most famous Superman of all time, died in October 2004 from a massive heart attack. That same year, Marlon Brando died at the age of 80, an eccentric and recluse in his Mulholland Drive mansion. And tragedy would even strike Lee Quigley, the boy who played Brando's screen son, the baby Kal-El.
He was the baby that Marlon Brando held and put in a capsule to send to safety, finally landing on Earth. And he was chosen from a casting search of many hundreds of little infants, largely because he supposedly looked similar to Marlon Brando.
Lee Quigley was 10 months old at the time, and his attachment to Marlon Brando and Susanna York was very apparent on the film.
Kal-El.
Maybe at school he might have been teased, or if the school kids found out that he had been the Superman, or if he boasted about it as a young child. I don't really know what the circumstances were, but young death is terribly sad.
Lee Quigley died at the age of 14 from solvent abuse.
I believe it was air freshener that the coroner said was finally what killed him. He was inhaling it. Friends apparently had tried to stop him, but he was Superman's kid and apparently wouldn't listen to anybody.
By December 2005, a heart attack also claimed the life of Richard Pryor after his 20-year battle with multiple sclerosis. But despite losing 4 of her co-stars, Margot Kidder remains skeptical about the infamous Hollywood hex.
I think the Curse of Superman stuff is nonsense. I think it's just nonsense. The reality is, if you get any group of people, and you statistically get, say, a group of 100 people, X number is going to have some sort of calamity in their life, because that's what life is about.
If I were Warner Brothers, I would definitely go to a voodoo princess and ask that the curse be lifted, so that nobody else is struck deathly ill or be mortally wounded. Or it's fascinating.
Now, after 20 years, the long-awaited Superman 5 is about to hit the big screen. With the death of Superman's biggest stars, will the final chapter of the movie franchise escape the might of the Superman curse?
I'm sure there are actors who do worry about the curse of Superman and do consider very carefully about wanting to get involved in the project.
Mental breakdown, suicide, and murder. A catalogue of tragedies has damned Superman's biggest stars since its co-creators put a curse on the movie back in the 70s. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who'd spent their lives fighting to regain ownership of their invention, died unsuccessful and bitter in the 90s. But the question is, did the curse die with them? Superman returned to the small screen in the 90s. The famous cape was passed to Dean Cain, who starred in the hit TV series The New Adventures of Superman alongside Terry Hatcher. This hot modern couple had a new romantic take on the relationship between Lois and Clark.
Clark?
Just a sec, Lois. What was great about Lois and Clark was that it was about Clark. And then Clark and his romance with Lois was fantastic. And that was the crux of the show, which is different. I guess I'm just not attracted to you, Lois.
Liar, you are so attracted to me.
I guess not.
Guess so.
Guess not.
Guess so.
Can we get back to the story now, please?
Fine by me.
I've been around for a while. So far, nothing's gone wrong with me, knock on wood.
Superman's been hit constantly by bad luck. So, you know, you can be skeptical about it. You can say, oh, it's just a series of coincidences. But really, I mean, too much has happened to all these people involved. Too many tragedies have happened in their lives.
Listen, if I'm cursed, I'm doing all right, you know, but I'm still young and we'll see what happens. But life is life, and tragedy will befall every single one of us. We're all going to die at some point.
And now there is a new Superman. After an 11-year struggle to find an actor to step into Christopher Reeve's boots, the 5th movie is about to hit cinemas across the globe. Shot on location in Australia, with a budget said to be in excess of $400 million, Superman Returns is already the most expensive film in movie history.
If you go down to Warner Brothers Studios Outside one of the giant sound stages, they have a painting of Superman that went up, it's got to be 10, 15 years ago. It was there to announce Superman 5. It's still there today, and finally they might have their 5th Superman, but it's stayed there, and every few years they go and refresh the paint. But they have struggled mightily to put a face to that Superman.
Some of the world's most famous actors, including Josh Hartnett, Nicolas Cage and Jude Law, have been linked to the role of Superman.
I'm sure there are actors who do worry about the curse of Superman and do consider very carefully about wanting to get involved in the project.
Ashton Kutcher, a major TV star with a very good film career, actually said he refused to get involved with Superman after he was linked to the role because of the curse. He didn't want to run the risk of becoming another victim of the curse.
I still think it's pretty dangerous business.
Hope nothing goes wrong.
But despite Hollywood superstition surrounding the curse, one man wasn't afraid to step into Superman's suit. In what has become a Superman tradition, yet another unknown actor was cast in the lead role, Brandon Routh.
I'm excited to see someone else put on the suit and fly around and be called Superman. That's fun. It's a daunting character to play, and I hope this guy does a great job.
My heart goes out to the kid playing Superman because he's going to be fairly or unfairly compared to Chris no matter what he does. And he could be brilliant, and somebody's going to take a whack at him because he's not Chris Reeve. So he's got a really tough mountain to climb.
Brandon Routh is the spitting image of his predecessor, Christopher Reeve. But will this uncanny resemblance be enough to convince cinema goers that he is Superman for a new generation?
A dream destined to change the world.
It's going to have to be very impressive indeed to justify all the hype, to justify all the expense. And I imagine a lot of people in Hollywood are keeping their fingers crossed firmly at this moment.
The fate of the new Superman and its latest stars remains to be seen. Has the bad luck finally run its course, or will the curse of Superman strike again?
Coming up next on 4, a study of two very different personalities. One with a degree in gender studies, the other an adult film star with a world record your mother wouldn't be proud of. The story of Annabelle Chong is next.